The winds of change are blowing in NASCAR racing, and some popular names are fading into the background. And we just minutes ago had confirmation of a major NASCAR retirement. Let's get into it. So yesterday, there was a major breaking story right at the end of the day, and it was this photo, which looks very benign when you first look at it, but when you look very closely, you look at Kevin Harvick's suit and you see a logo that says forever, invoking the 24-ever last season of Jeff Gordon, which meant that many people assumed the inevitable, which has been confirmed just minutes ago by Jordan Bianchi of The Athletic, that Kevin Harvick is done full-time racing at the end of the 2023 NASCAR season. And I'll tell you that I definitely saw this coming. You guys, if you were here with me on the channel in November, there were some comments made by both Tony Stewart, actually Gene Haas as well, and Kevin Harvick that seemed to indicate that Kevin Harvick was more or less done with NASCAR. And now we have gotten to this point where right before the season, Kevin Harvick is set to make an announcement tomorrow that will officially end his NASCAR career at the end of the 2023 season. Of course, we'll probably get to talk about that a lot more in tomorrow's video when we've got more information on exactly what no more full-time racing means. Likely, I would guess he's probably going to go drive in the Cars Tour if I had a guess. I would probably bet against him doing any more Cup races after 2023. I think everybody's burned out on that one to a certain extent. And that also, again, we'll talk about this tomorrow, I think, but we'll call into question Tony Stewart's involvement. We know how friendly he is with Kevin Harvick. And maybe Ryan Preece is kind of that life raft, like I kind of talked about a couple months ago, that, of course, Tony wanted Ryan Preece in the car. He ended up eventually getting that when Cole Custer got moved to Xfinity Series. So I don't know, man. It's definitely you want to talk about end of an era. I know we're going to be talking about the Petties later in this video, but the driver who replaced Dale Earnhardt after his untimely death at Daytona in 2001 is retiring. The sport, NASCAR, is entering its 75th anniversary, and it really does seem to be moving on from the past, both in good ways and bad ways. And that past is beginning to move on as well. And I think in a lot of ways, Kevin Harvick represents kind of that transitional period, a transitional period which I think NASCAR has essentially been in since 2001, including the golden era. Really, you want to talk about post 2001 and kind of the high it was riding there for a long time. I think for better or for worse, there were changes that were made that are kind of irreparable. Is that the right word? I think I said that right. I said it better than Muhammad, the FIA president's name. There have been some major changes in NASCAR, and that kind of is Kevin Harvick's era. He's one of the defining drivers of that era. He and Jimmy Johnson, really, if you think about it. And we're talking about both of those drivers today, and both of them will be stepping back, or Jimmy's already stepped back. He'll be running a couple of races this year. But so many of those drivers from that era, an era that's very special to me, are going away. And I know I gotta give a shout out to my friend Buddy. It's tough when this stuff happens, but I know it. When your favorite driver retires, that's always a sad one for sure. And we're gonna have to see where this all leads, because all of a sudden there's an opening at Stewart-Haas Racing at the end of the 2023 season. Presumably, you would think that would be Cole Custer, but I'm going to throw a name out there, and I think a lot of other people are going to throw this name out there. Probably Ford wants it, and there's probably sponsors that are willing to step up. Do you know who I'm going to say? Say it in the comments. I'm about to say it. Hailie Deegan. Just saying. We'll see. We'll see. But I think that may be where it's headed. Petty GMS has been rebranded as Legacy Motor Club. The rebranded team will make its points race debut with Eric Jones, Noah Gragson, and Jimmy Johnson at the Daytona 500 in February. This is the first time in NASCAR's 75-year history that a team will not carry the Petty name. Lee Petty Engineering, as the team was called back then, made its debut at the Okanagan Speedway during the 1949 NASCAR season, where Lee Petty finished ninth. Of course, Petty also went on to win the inaugural Daytona 500 10 years later in 1959, and the Petty name has lasted all the way up until today. Now, it's important to note that Richard Petty is still involved with the team, and the name was chosen due to Jimmy Johnson, Richard Petty, and Mike Beam's combined success in winning 22 NASCAR titles between those three team members. Jimmy Johnson's number was also revealed today as number 84, appropriate, as not only is the inverse of his famous and favorite number 48, but also represents the final NASCAR victory in terms of a year for driver Richard Petty. He won Firecracker 400 in 1984. Jimmy will be sponsored by Carvana once again as he attempts to qualify for the Daytona 500 this year. Remember, his entry, the number 84, is not a chartered entry. And what of the other 500-mile race? Well, Jenna Fryer of the Associated Press says that the Indy 500 is still in play for Jimmy at this point, and Chip Ganassi Racing is awaiting a decision from him because of the engine allocation. Johnson can say he can run a Honda in the Indy 500 as a Chevy guy, and a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that Carvana is sticking with Jimmy, at least for now. We'll talk about Carvana here in just a second. I do want to talk about Petty. It's pretty insane to me that essentially from the beginning, the Petty name has been associated with NASCAR. 1949, the very first season, Lee Petty and his team were there. It went through Richard, of course, 7 championships, the most Daytona 500 wins as well. Then you go on to Kyle, and then unfortunately the untimely early end of Adam Petty. But the team continued all the way through 2008, obviously merged with Gillette and Evernham and created a whole huge monster. And then eventually, of course, that team right-sized again a couple of times, became Richard Petty Motorsports. And then, of course, early or late last year, late 2021, so late 2 years ago, maybe someday I'll get with it. Late 2 years ago, it was sold to GMS, became Petty GMS, and now that Jimmy Johnson has bought into the team, it's called Legacy Motor Club. I keep wanting to call it Legacy Autosport because that's a team that races in Indy Pro 2000, and that very much confuses my brain. Too many teams sounding exactly the same. Legacy Motor Club, it sounds like a Ferrari GTE AM team. It sounds like something Rob Kaufman would be a part of. So it's surprising to me that it's Maury Gallagher and Richard Petty and Jimmy Johnson who have named their team this. It does make sense when I was given the explanation, which is, of course, that all those championships that Beam, Petty, and Johnson all won separately. I mean, there is a great legacy when you've got two 7-time NASCAR champions on the same team in the ownership group. But it's going to take a little while for that name to grow on me. There's no doubt about it. I'm curious, especially with the Daytona 500 entry list. I'm not convinced there's going to be more than 40 cars. It's going to be real close. So even if Jimmy has to qualify for the race, I don't exactly expect that it's going to be a major challenge for him. It may be a shoo-in, in fact, that he's going to qualify for that race. Ditto for the Indy 500, by the way. That's going to be a whole another discussion, I'm sure, at some point. Carvana. It's definitely encouraging to see Carvana continuing with Jimmy Johnson, because one of the major things that I think kept him out of IndyCar on a full-time basis this year was kind of the financial instability, I guess we can say, with Carvana. In part because one of the big financial backers, Ally, yes, that Ally pulled out from Carvana, but it seems like Carvana is at least sticking with Jimmy Johnson for the Daytona 500, and presumably that would be for the Indy 500 as well. Now, if Carvana is sticking with Jimmy and they're footing the bills, I think that makes an Indy 500 entry easier. And as Jenna Fryer reported, Carvana makes it less complicated to run a Honda in IndyCar and a Chevy in NASCAR, because they are a car dealership. They're not like a financier that's essentially just GM's financial wing, like Ally is. There were degrees of separation when Ally was involved with Carvana, that Carvana could then sponsor Jimmy, and Jimmy could run a Honda. And presumably, even though Ally and Carvana maybe aren't on the same terms anymore, I think it's still realistic to expect that, hey, let's say, I think I said 43. I don't know if Jimmy's going to run 43 at the Indy 500, if he does indeed do it. But I think it'd be 84 at this point. And I think he should. I mean, because I think one of the things that Jimmy talked about when he stepped back from full-time IndyCar competition is he wanted to cross bucket lists off his bucket list. Bucket list off his bucket list. Right, David? English is working very well for me today. But the double would be one of those, to run Coke 600 and the Indy 500 in the same day. And now that, of course, he has a NASCAR team, and clearly this NASCAR team is willing to enter open cars for him, makes a ton of sense. I'm very interested to see how he does in the Daytona 500, too. We haven't seen Jimmy Johnson in a NASCAR next-gen car yet. And I think this team, expanding with Jimmy, obviously, but also bringing in Noah Gragson, who's been extremely impressive, I think, especially in the Xfinity Series. But some of those fill-in drives he did for Bowman last year, I think, were very equally impressive, and something that I think very much earned him a spot in the NASCAR Cup Series on a full-time basis. So I think the GMS team, I don't think we need to sleep on them. And of course, Eric Jones broke through last year and won at Darlington for them. So I don't think we should count them out. I think they're going to be a very solid, legitimate team. And Jimmy Johnson racing for them, I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I guess they're going to unveil the Ally scheme tomorrow, or the Carvana scheme tomorrow. And of course, Kevin Harvick's retirement announcement is coming tomorrow. So looks like your boy isn't getting a break this week, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's exciting this way, isn't it? Subscribe if you haven't already. I want you along for the ride. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.